Hello, people of my page. My name is Kat, and welcome to my channel, Speak Truth to Lies. So today I wanted to share with you this really awesome article about being able to communicate and the importance of viewpoint diversity. I know we've heard a lot lately in the news about diversity, inclusion, and equity. But generally, what they're meaning is diversity, inclusion, and equity, as long as you buy into our ideology. Like I said, wokeism, or this idea of woke, being woke, it's a cult. It's an ideology. It's a dangerous one that's been happening on college campuses for a long time. And this article addresses that and brings to light the very important issues of listening and reasoning and compassion. So let's get started. Can you hear me now? The challenges and promise of viewpoint diversity. Decades ago, on the first day of freshman composition class with readings centered on the theme of war, I asked my students to respond to the following writing prompt: define an enemy. I was troubled to find that more than half of the students defined an enemy as someone who doesn't agree with you, or closely related wording. Having expected to read about enemy soldiers or longtime personal conflicts, I realized that I needed to start the next class session by discussing with my students the value of exploring differing viewpoints and the dangers of seeing viewpoint disagreements as personal attacks. So I'm sure it's no surprise to most of you, anybody that watches the news or primetime TV, that this whole concept of silence is violence or hate speech, which what they mean by hate speech is speech they disagree with, which is a completely different thing in regards to actual hate speech. So we have a lot of fragile ego running around. Words hurt, words are violence. It's simply not the case. Sadly, in our polarized society, this critical thinking problem continues to plague us. Rather than embracing viewpoint diversity by exploring views that deeply challenge our own, many of us often close ourselves off to different views and those who hold them. In extreme cases on college campuses, students try to silence speakers whose views they find offensive. If you need an example of this, I highly recommend going onto YouTube and searching Benjamin Boyce and Evergreen. These actions do not bring us closer to understanding and relating well to one another. In fact, they escalate rather than resolve conflicts and divide rather than unite us. Faculty can and should create safe classroom spaces for good faith free exchange of ideas. During such exchanges, students are genuinely open to examining their own views critically and to hearing, reading, analyzing, writing about, discussing, and trying to understand others' different, even personally challenging views. As many faculty can testify, creating these learning spaces helps students grow both intellectually and socially. Accusations that colleges and universities stifle viewpoint diversity continue to mount. Many among the public distrust higher education. Well, I'm even more so distrustful of higher education and elementary education now, with critical race theory being injected into our children's educational institutions. Some of our higher education colleges colleagues claim that they have lost their jobs because of their views. Okay, this right here, conservatives are being fired. Okay, not anybody that shares liberal left agendas or viewpoints. Conservatives who are questioning this toxic ideology are being fired. Scholar Stephen F. Hayward, for example, wrote in July-August 2020 issue of Commentary magazine that he voluntarily withdrew from his invited appointment to teach at the University of California, Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy, after students directed an onslaught of pressure at the dean who had hired him. Other colleges argue that colleges and universities prepare students to be ideological purists who, after graduation, apply their learning to the detriment of society. Again, detriment. This is not doing us any good. For example, Professor John M. Ellis lamented in the Wall Street Journal in July 2020 that universities used to be, past tense, used to be places where the major political and social issues of the day could be researched and debated, and warned that now the campus offers not a reasoned corrective to partisan passions, but fierce one-sided advocacy of dangerous and destructive ideas. Lawmakers taking notice and could respond. Lawmakers are taking notice and could respond by cutting funding for higher education, which they should. These people should be fired. They should lose their funding because they're not teaching kids how to critically think. They're teaching them what to think. And then they're teaching them to shut down any voices that have a differing opinion or view, labeling it hate speech. How should we respond to such threats to the credibility and perhaps funding of higher education? More specifically, how can we ensure that we create allies among a diverse group of citizens who could work together to achieve a just society? There's a whole lot of talk right now talking about how America is a racist country and the founding fathers were racist because they owned slaves and all this other stuff, judging the past by the moral standards of today. We're not stupid. We already know that slavery was wrong, which is why we abolished it. And I see a lot of people on Twitter, well, what about Jim Crow laws and blah, 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 blah. Those laws were put on the books by Democrats because they wanted to fiercely hold on to the idea of slavery. And even though some of those laws weren't removed from the books until the 70s, again, like I mentioned yesterday, if there are still laws on the books in terms of redlining or anything like that, get rid of them. We don't need to teach our kids to hate this country. We need to teach our children how to think critically, how to have conversations, to build upon what we've already created. If we ourselves do not embrace viewpoint diversity, and if we fail to expose students regularly to viewpoint diversity practices, we risk losing the opportunity to help students develop resilience and practice forming alliances with people whose views differ from theirs. Without this training, college graduates are ill-equipped to become civically engaged members of their communities. Working for the common good requires such alliances. Embracing viewpoint diversity is a necessary foundational condition for achieving this end. In fact, if we persevere in this work, we might even discover that, as the following extreme example demonstrates, sometimes unlikely allies are not so much out of reach as they are unknowingly in the making. So I want to go back to this right here, where it says, help the students develop resilience and practice forming alliances. Okay, so we really, really did go out of control with the whole anti-bullying thing. And let me explain. While I understand that bullying is a bad thing, especially physical, if you're physically harming another child and you're a child, that should be handled. An example, though, of how ridiculous this has gotten. When my son was 6 years old, he's got developmental issues. The school knew about this. I got a phone call one day from my son's school explaining to me that they had to have the talk about being a bully with him because he called another child a hot dog. He was 6. So name calling, a hot dog. Yes, I'm serious. That's how ridiculous and out of control this has gotten. As he got older, got a little bit worse. He has developmental issues. I'm not making excuses, but I can tell you how it plays out. So the 2 kids are brought in, the transgressor and the transgressed. The transgressor is made to apologize to the transgressed, saying, I will work on being a better friend, which is great. But at the same time, the conversation that's missing from this whole dynamic is talking to the transgressed and explaining to them about resiliency. Words only have power if you give them power. Anybody that was bullied, anybody from my generation understands or knows, their parents probably had this talk with them. When you come home from school, before all these bullying practices got put into place, you come home from school and you got tormented. Maybe the kids called you names, so on and so forth. And what did your parent probably tell you? I'd be willing to bet they told you the same thing that my mom told me. Those words don't matter. You are none of those things. Just continue to be yourself. It doesn't matter what this person over here says about you, because you're not. When my son would come home from school, because quite often he's picked on and teased, which is, he retaliates because it's human nature, but he'd come home and be like, Mom, so-and-so said I was stupid. Well, you want to know what I did with my son? I certainly didn't call a school and be like, and raise hell, like, this person's calling my kids names. I looked at my kid and I said, well, are you stupid? And he's like, no. I'm like, then who cares what this kid said? The only person's opinion that matters to you is, at the end of the day, is yours. And as long as you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm a good person, I did the best I can, tomorrow I'll try to do better, that's all that matters. But we don't teach our kids that anymore. We call the school and helicopter parent and come to their defense instead of asking questions like, well, what did you do? Because most of the time he instigated it. My child's not infallible, and he certainly isn't perfect. So here is an example of where compassion and discourse can change minds. For years, Derek Black, the son and godson, respectively, of the longtime white supremacist leaders Don Black and David Duke, was being groomed as a leader in the white nationalist movement. On his father's Stormfront radio talk show, Derek Black articulated his vision of a white nationalist America. Charismatic and intelligent, he became a spokesperson for the movement. But then something happened. As detailed in Eli Saslow's Rising Out of Hatred, The Awakening of a Former White Nationalist, Black enrolled in New College of Florida, a small liberal arts college where he secretly continued to do his radio broadcasts. But he also met and interacted with several students from groups whose members were targets of white supremacist racism. After his identity was discovered, rather than abandon him, patiently and respectfully, they listened to his views, countered them with their own ideas and lived experiences, and shared persuasive scholarly work with him. To his credit, Black was open to learning about views that challenged his most deeply held convictions. In time, he began to see that his assumptions and evidence were faulty, and that his radio talks profoundly harmed the kinds of people with whom he now become friends. Black abandoned his former views and, at greater personal risk, left the white supremacist movement. He now speaks to audiences about the dangers of white nationalism. Although a number of factors contributed to Black's transformation, this change likely would not have occurred had his schoolmates not engaged him in ongoing, difficult, because these conversations are difficult, yet civil conversations. As educators confronting the challenges of grappling with viewpoint diversity, we must take a page out of these students' book. It's funny because I want to read this book now. But Oprah did a similar show back in the mid-90s, which is why I kind of abhor this whole agenda that she's pushing now about white supremacy and white privilege. Oprah, really? That's all I got to say. Really? Because back in the 90s, Oprah had a show, on her show, Oprah, and she invited young white college students who were raised in this very ideology that they're talking about here, that this young man was raised in. Children of members of the KKK, they were raised, because remember what I said yesterday? Racism stems from ignorance. Ignorance. Okay? So the whole point of the show is that these young white college students who had been raised in this dangerous white supremacist nationalist movement of the KKK, like this young man, Derek Black, all went away to college. And the story was the same across the board. Every single one of these young people went to colleges where they were exposed to different cultures, different ideas that challenged their deeply held ideas and convictions that were taught to them by their family and by the community that they lived in. And they all ended up walking away from their families because they could no longer hold that kind of hate and ignorance in their hearts or their minds, because they had conversations. They had civil, difficult conversations with other people who expressed the same kind of love and compassion that these students did with this young man, and changed their minds. There's also a Black man by the name of Daryl Davis. He did a TED Talk. He's got several YouTube videos. This Black man, willingly and on his own went to KKK rallies. Now you're probably thinking, oh, that's dangerous. Yes, but as in his TED Talk, he went and had conversations. These people have hateful ideas, but overall, most of them are not hateful people. They've been raised in a very cocoon-like community. I'd be willing to bet with very few ethnic minorities. They're very sheltered. They keep their children protected, and they teach these ignorant ideas. Those will only go so far if you go out into the world. If you stay cocooned in your little bubble, they will fester and continue to grow. So this man, Daryl Davis, went into these KKK rallies and struck up conversations with different people there. As his TED Talk implies and some of his other YouTube videos show, he's converted quite a few members of the KKK. They've left because they can no longer share those viewpoints. One guy went on record saying that he went to a rally shortly after meeting Daryl Davis, and they're sitting there talking about, Black people are this and this and this. And he's like, well, that's nothing like my friend Daryl. That doesn't sound anything like, matter of fact, that change minds through conversation. Derek Black and his schoolmates could have easily seen themselves as enemies and refused to communicate. Fortunately, they did not take that path. No, they took the path of love and compassion. Thus, this case study provokes a serious question for us higher education professionals. If the heir apparent to a key faction of the white nationalist movement and the students who are targets of that movement's racism could have such challenging and sometimes disturbing conversations, might not the rest of us, including our students, also benefit from having them? To be sure, we need to tread carefully, since many of us have been the targets of hateful ideas and actions. But colleges and universities can encourage risk-taking and thinking and serve as safe havens for examining different views. Unfortunately, this isn't happening. If this would have happened today with this young man, they would have ran him off campus. And you know what that would have done? That would have only reinforced his ignorance and ideas that he had about Black people. That's all it would have done. It would have reinforced, and he would have dug in, and chances are this young man would have never seen the light, so to speak, because remember, sunlight is the best disinfectant. If we are genuinely committed to being open to others' perspectives and the concomitant goal of securing communities' well-being, then we need a diverse group of allies working to bridge the gaps of our often dangerous divides. Ultimately, whatever cost we might incur to our feelings of comfort when we fully embrace viewpoint diversity, surely, as Derek Black's story demonstrates, the cost of censoring viewpoints and silencing dialogue is far greater. It is, because, one of the words that they throw around a lot is systemic racism. But if you challenge any of these people where the systemic racism occurs, they just simply say everywhere. It's everywhere. It's embedded everywhere, which means they can't give you an example. Most of these people's ideas, they cannot back up with facts. And they won't have a discourse with anybody that either disagrees or tries to get down to the heart of what they're talking about. Like I said yesterday, we don't need more laws. We don't need more laws. What we need to do is go through the laws that are on the legislation that no longer serve us, because there are some on the books, because they never remove one. When they reinstitute a new law, they don't go and remove one. They just keep compiling. So we don't need new laws. What we need to do is we need to go through the laws that we have that have been legislated, and we need to remove the ones that no longer serve us. And then we need to enforce the ones that we have. So here are some guides. How to guide groups in embracing viewpoint diversity. When possible, have participants sit in a circle in order to create a community-like setting. Agree to jettison hierarchies in the room. Also agree that no one will be retaliated against for expressing a view that others do not like. Well, that's happening everywhere right now, as we can see. One by one, everyone should commit to these agreements verbally. Establish decorum rules that everyone agrees to follow. For example, no name calling or personal attacks. And this is what the left does very well. And this is what's happening in schools right now with white parents that are challenging critical race theory being taught to their children. They're immediately being labeled as racist because they don't want their children to be taught in schools to become racists, because critical race theory is all about divisiveness, dividing people according to group identities instead of looking at each individual. So anytime a white parent now challenges these, or even challenges going to a work training where they have to denounce their whiteness, whatever that is, they're being labeled a racist. It's creating a hostile environment for them at work. And 9 times out of 10, if they're not let go, they're pushed out. Because these ideas appeal to emotions, not reason, emotions. They use emotionally charged words to incite anger, hostility, any of those things. Because most people at some point in their lives have been transgressed upon in one way or another, or they feel that they've been transgressed upon. So if you can manipulate those emotions and get them riled up, logic and reason go out the door. Because when we go into a state of emotion, emotionally reacting, our frontal lobe shuts down. We are no longer able to think critically. And that's what they do. It's designed to do that. Ensure that everyone who wants to speak will have an opportunity to do so. Perhaps use a talking stick. Especially for difficult discussions, establish common ground that unites the group, such as, do we all agree that we want to be engaged citizens working for the benefit of our communities? Another example would be, do we all agree that slavery was bad? I'd be willing to bet that there's a very small percentage of America today that is okay or was okay with the idea of slavery. We already know it's horrible and it's still going on today, but we want to focus on the slavery that occurred 400 years ago and not the slavery that's going on right now in Nigeria or China. Why would we want to address that when we can live in the past? Ask participants to avoid using overly general words or phrases such as liberals, conservatives, the left, or the right. Often such terms are divisive and do not advance understanding or help create alliances. So look, I understand and I know that I'm not a big fan of the liberal left. I'm not talking about libertarians. I'm talking about these far left extremists, this toxic woke ideology, these people that are pushing this very dangerous agenda that is shutting down conversation. I have a huge problem with them because they're literally, I mean, they're in the liberal legacy media. Like it's all CNN, MSNBC, all the news outlets pushing this narrative, pushing this agenda. Those people I can't stand. And I'm very grateful that I have a lot of friends that listen to me discuss my ideas and figure this stuff out for myself, because that's what I'm doing. I'm still learning. I'm learning. I'm not perfect. If I make a mistake and someone points it out, I have enough humility to acknowledge that I made a mistake and say I'm sorry and mean it. I have friends who voted for Biden, and while I don't agree with that, sorry about that, guys. My internet just went down for a second. So as I was saying, I have a lot of friends that voted for Biden, and that's fine. I'm simply trying to point out that decisions based on feelings have consequences, as we can see happening right now. But you know, my friends know that I voted for Trump, and the ones that are still around, I love you guys, because I've lost a lot of friends. I had very personal decisions, like a lot of my friends did, for voting for Biden. You know, some of them I'm sure just voted against Trump, but hey, it doesn't pay to be an uninformed voter, but I'm not going to criticize them. Like you did what you did, but I'm not going to stop criticizing this administration and what I see them doing wrong. But mine was a very personal decision because, for the most part, those who are informed voters, it is a very personal decision. So I thank you all who listen to my videos and give me grace and patience. Again, I'm still learning. Remind participants to listen and speak to others as they would want others to listen and speak to them. Agree to listen to others in order to understand rather than to be ready to reply to them. Now, I'm sure that you guys experience this maybe more than once a week, maybe twice a week, but you can always tell when you're talking to someone that they're not really hearing what you're saying. They're simply just waiting for their turn. Like they've literally heard one thing that you said that they disagree with, and they're already formulating their response to you without listening to the rest of what you're saying, which takes everything out of context. And then when they respond or react, it's focused on that one thing they disagreed with instead of the whole of the argument. And you can always tell these people because they generally stop looking at you and they check out right here. I had a friend like that once. Before participants respond to a perspective that they find problematic, they should first summarize the perspective in a way that the person holding it would deem accurate. If they summarize it incorrectly, they should ask for clarification. Now, I teach cosmetology, so what we call this is reflective listening. So the client tells us what they want, and we listen, and then we repeat back to them what we think they said to make sure we're on the same page before we proceed. Because if I don't, and I misinterpret them, and I just go into doing what I'm doing, and that's not what they wanted done, we have a problem. So always make sure that you summarize what the person said to make sure that when you provide your rebuttal, it's accurate. Commit to supporting each other, especially when people disagree. It's normal to feel uncomfortable when hearing good faith views that challenge one's own assumptions. Participants should not necessarily assume bad faith on the part of those whose views they find challenging. Most people are good people, even if they might hold hateful views. This is where compassion comes into play, because where did those views come from? Do they really believe it? The article that I read yesterday, I tried to practice good faith. I tried not to assume that the gentleman that wrote the hateful article genuinely believes that. I don't know him. I would hope, like I said, and pray that he doesn't hold those views. But at the same time, if he doesn't, why would he write it? Again, we have to be careful what we say, not only out loud, but to ourselves, especially to ourselves. Be careful of the conversations you have in your head up here. At the end of each session, restate the group's unifying common ground. Inject grace. Grace is everything. It allows for mistakes. And unfortunately, right now with cancel culture and everything, the people going back 10, 20 years to pull up someone's racist tweet, like, or this 17-year-old girl that was denied her scholarship because some hateful boy held on to her saying the N-word when she was 15. She's like in her early 20s now and ruining her academic career, because who makes good decisions as a teenager? None of us. None of us do. You're going to ruin this girl's adult life because of a mistake that she made. And I think it was just she was rapping a song or singing a song or something and said the N-word. And he ruined her life and took pride in it. Felt all vindicated and meh. He's a horrible human being. It would be different if this girl was malicious. It was one time that she did it. It happened to be caught on video. I think a friend made the video and she was rapping us. I don't know, but it was stupid. And the fact that this young man came out and felt vindicated and proud of himself for ruining this young white girl's life because she made a mistake. I won't even say mistake. She was rapping a song at the age of 15 and okay. This is the level of ridiculousness, and this does not allow for grace. Okay. Calling someone a racist like they did with Trump with no proof. This is why white people are so terrified. This word, like there's no investigation. They did it to me. I had one of my white friends do it to me. Started a racist smear campaign on her Facebook page. Known her for over 10 years. No critical thinking went into this whatsoever, looking at our friendship and evaluating anything and be like, well, this doesn't make sense. All based off of something that some little douche tool did by a comment I made on a friend's page, cropped it to remove the context, which made me sound kind of shitty. And then she just jumped on the train. Shame on you. Remember, ultimately, it's about maintaining good relationships, establishing alliances, and strengthening the group's health, not about adopting the same perspectives. So this is the danger of the left right now. Okay. You can't have another viewpoint. You have to believe the way we do, or we're going to label you a transphobe, a racist, misogynist. And this shuts down honest discourse. Right now, you can't even question the whole giving young children hormones. You can't question the narrative. If you question the narrative, you are going to be labeled all of those things. And this is not how a civil society acts. We can do better. Until we stop recognizing color first and don't start having conversations with people and recognizing our commonalities, We all feel anger. We all feel fear, sadness. Human emotion is human. Emotion and feelings don't have color. Commonalities, this whole microaggressions thing. You can't ask people where they're from. You can't ask them what they do. You can't, do you realize that if you meet someone and you're like, oh, wow, that person looks really interesting, I want to get to know them. How are you supposed to get to know them if you can't ask them questions like, so where'd you grow up? Where are you from? What do you do for a living? Because for me, with those questions, I'm looking for common interests. Maybe we're from the same area. Maybe we grew up in the same area. Maybe we have similar jobs. But now they're considered microaggressions. If someone takes offense to that, you can get in trouble. Do you see how ridiculous this is getting? That we can't even take interest in other people and ask them questions? And as far as this whole cultural appropriation thing, okay, first off, any business, because I'm a cosmetologist, remember, any business that denies Black women to wear their hair natural, I have a huge problem with. I love textured hair. If you don't, I would question you as to why. Because see, where people want to separate themselves because of differences, I think like with this same woke ideology, everybody has to think the same. Wouldn't it suck? And wouldn't this world be a very boring place if everybody looked exactly the same? If you cannot appreciate the beauty that this world has to offer, I suggest you remove the wool from over your eyes. That would be like going out into nature and not recognizing the beauty. It makes no sense to me. But I can tell you this right now, the only people that are objecting for the most part to white girls wearing dreads, braids, anything like that, are these critical social justice warriors that went to school. Cultural appropriation. They're the only ones screaming about it. Because I can tell you this right now, my girls, the primary demographic of my students are young Black women. They don't care what color you are. They'll braid your hair. Oh, you want some feed-ins? Yeah, girl, come here. They don't care. They don't care. So I don't know who these people are screaming about that nonsense, but go away. Go away. It's not real. It's all made up. We have much bigger things in this world to be concerned about. But if we don't start having honest dialogue, and please, if you're watching this video and you don't agree with anything that I say, leave a comment. We'll have a conversation. I'm certainly not devaluing anybody's lived experience, but until we can have honest, difficult conversations and compassionate dialogue with one another and try to break down and get to the real issues outside of our feelings, like why is this happening? This country is going to fall apart. If we can't have honest, compassionate dialogue and figure out why racial disparities exist in schools, why certain schools do perform so poorly. If we can't have these conversations, we are never going to solve the problem for our younger generation. We're doing them a huge disservice by allowing critical race theory to come into elementary education and reinforcing this narrative of victim and oppressor. As a recovering addict, I can tell you right now that maintaining the victimhood narrative, the negative feedback loop that you get stuck in your head, believing that you are oppressed and that you're a victim and blah, blah, it does nothing to help. It only hinders. It hindered my life for 42 years until I got better. until I made the decision to go to rehab and change my thoughts, change the way I speak to myself. So if you like this video, if you like the content of its message, please like this video, share this video, subscribe to my channel, share it with anybody that you feel might need to hear the article. Until next time, my friends, remember, hypocrisy is everywhere. Speak truth to lies.